But I also have been fortunate that I have just had a very strong support network. And, but there are days that you definitely feel like alone and isolated.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the key is finding the people who, value you, and are there to help build you up versus break you down. And I think the key that has made me who I am is also knowing that sometimes you have to work a little bit harder to be able to make sure that your voice is heard and not being afraid to speak up, and call people out when they don't value what you're saying to the same degree as your male counterparts at the table.
Hello, and welcome to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group. I am your host, Matt Allred. In this podcast, we talk to the people whose lives and careers are dedicated to the vertical transportation industry to inform and share lessons learned, building upon the foundation of those who have gone before to inspire the next generation of elevator careers. Today, our guest is Erin Scott, Chief Operating Officer, U.S. Inspections at ATIS. Erin joined the elevator industry after being a naval fighter pilot and aviation maintenance duty officer in the U.S. military and quickly found her niche. Erin is passionate about learning as much as possible and knows the value of asking questions. Although she wondered if she was in the right place at first, Erin found many people who were as eager to teach as she was to learn. Erin loves the industry and loves being connected with those who are solving problems and making the magic happen. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Glad to be here today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be able to talk with you again. It's always a privilege, and it's fun to talk about your career. You have a pretty unique just background and everything, and so I'd love to just start off with you telling us a little bit about how you got started in the elevator industry.
Yeah, thanks. So about 15 years ago, I was coming out of the military, and I went through Bradley Morris, which is a military recruiting company. And I said, I did all of this stuff, in the military, and how does it translate into civilian speak? And I was met with a great team there that helped me, translate that, all the stuff that I did into civilian language. And they put me with several different companies to interview with, one of which happened to be Otis Elevator. And I was like, oh, elevators, like, what does that even mean? I didn't even know, what the elevator business would entail. And of all the different companies that I interviewed with, it was actually the one that I immediately fell in love with. And it truly translated, the most with what I had done in the military.
Let's talk
And
for just a minute about your military career. You said you were coming out 15 years ago. What were you doing in the military? What was kind of your specialty?
yeah, so I had gone to Auburn University, majored in aviation management there, and had got my commission through the ROTC program and went through the flight program through the Navy, became an F-18 pilot, did that for a few years before I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that took me out of the cockpit.
So what you're telling me though is they could have made Top Gun about you.
Maybe.
That's awesome.
I had a long way to go to get, to that caliber, but definitely was on the journey. So I remember, not being able to fly anymore and then saying, well, I still have a long commitment, to my service obligation. So now what? And I converted over to be an aviation maintenance officer. So, poetic justice, I guess, now running a squadron of maintainers now fixing everything that I used to break.
Right.
And so with that, it was really, the same type of concept in terms of routine maintenance, scheduled maintenance, but then also adapting to repairs on the fly, no pun intended, I guess. But
Yeah.
in terms of, things break and how are you going to fix it and how are you
Well,
going to
they're
keep.
high risk, right? I mean, if you don't fix your airplane, if you don't maintain it, you've got a lot at stake. In the same with an elevator, right? If somebody gets hurt, if something falls, if something um, very similar in that regard.
Yeah, actually, exactly that. And, the life safety aspect, of it. And not only that, a lot of the systems and fundamentals, between, hydraulic and pneumatic systems, electronics, all of it tied, together conceptually the same way. So the fundamental training that I had in the aviation industry, translated into, the elevator industry code and all. Obviously, you had to learn that more vertical plane versus three-dimensional, but
Sure.
it really built the foundation. And, Bradley Morris like nailed it, when they put me in front of, and it could have been any of the majors, but, sitting there with Otis having the need, it really was like the perfect job. And
What clicked for you first? I mean, you said you fell in love. It almost sounds like right from the beginning, like from the handshake on. It's like click. What was it that really came
yes,
together for you?
so my husband was a federal agent, and it was hard for us, starting a family, to co-locate and also make sure that somebody was always home for dinner. So when we were trying to decide what was next as a family, one of us needed to hang it up. And so the decision was for me to do that. So in that transition, it was, how am I going to find a job that was still satisfying, still use the skill sets that I had built, that still made me feel like I was part of that team aspect. And I remember sitting in, the series of interviews, through that process with Otis, and everybody that I met emphatically like smiled when they talked about like their journey through the pipeline. And in each interview, it was like, hi, I'm so and so. I've been here 20 years. Then it was like progressive. Then the next room, it's like, I'm such and such. I've been here 30 years. Even meeting people that have been there 40 and 45 years. So coming out of a military environment where a lot of people spend 25, 30 years in that environment, you grow and you build, and it's a family and it's a team. To see that translate into the civilian world, where I just thought people bounced between jobs and that you would never find that team aspect, that family, concept where everybody was kind of in it together to still win it together. It really just felt like home. And that was just a really important aspect when I was looking for like that next chapter.
Yeah. What was it? I mean, I guess just to look, just kind of straight across, it almost seems like coming out of, especially with the degree in aviation management, I think you said, and then to go into flying, was there some thoughts that, hey, I should just go straight into working for one of the airlines or an airline manufacturer or something like that?
Yeah, I looked at a lot of that too. For a lot of the airlines, maintenance is done at night. So that was like another piece with the family. Um, I have had big dreams of getting back into the aviation industry, but then again, it was still who's going to be home at night, to feed the
Right.
kids, and all, so it was a tough, there's now a mortality piece as you start to have children too, where before
Sure.
it's all about lighting my hair on fire and, not worrying about, what happens at the end of the day. So there was a lot, that had changed, so, I still, dabble in it, from time to time, but to make it a career, and a lot changed after 9/11 with the industry, and where like the path had charted, and so, um, so I needed more of a grounded job. And so I knew that I had enough like knowledge and stuff that I had built in that industry to be successful, and use that in anything that was still hands-on and that still served, that greater public population, so whether it's flying, families from here to there or cargo from here to there, mail from here to there, now I'm just transporting people in a different medium,
Sure.
so it's still the same kind of concept, just a little bit slower.
Yeah, yeah. Is it scary to transition out of the military? I mean, imagine it's just I don't know how long you were in there, but that's a big shift. Like you said, where to live, right? Try to co-locate with your husband's job. I mean, what were some of the difficulties of that transition?
Well, first learning how to get dressed every day, not, not just having somebody tell you what to wear. But no, it was definitely different because, first, you live in an acronym world, so it's breaking down the barriers of that and learning to speak, civilian speak again, which I was grateful for the elevator industry to have just as many acronyms. Um, and then it's also shifting the mindset of, that hierarchy of you do what you're told based on rank structure. And, sometimes it's just, it's a no questions asked kind of business where now you're in an environment where you're asking mechanics to go do something and they don't necessarily have to do it your way, anymore because, we're, not in that government, structure and stuff. So there was, a little bit of that, mental mind shift of we work fixed hours, in the civilian world where, in the military, you work until, the job's done. So,
Sure.
there was a little bit of like that kind of transition, but the end of the day, the fundamentals, were all there. And the neat part too, I found in the elevator industry was everybody still felt like whether you were an apprentice with 3 days of experience, a mechanic with 3 years of experience, or that seasoned adjuster with 30 years, everybody, you know, puts the same amount of effort into getting the job done. So, because they understand the value of what that service that they're providing to the building, means.
Yeah, yeah. So started with Otis, and they throw you in your job. What was it like your first interaction with a customer, or what maybe a memorable experience where you were in that role?
Yeah, so I started in the Boston area and, obviously didn't really look the part. There weren't many women in the office structure up here. I grew up down south, so though I thought I had long since lost my accent clearly to the people up here, I hadn't, so they're like, she doesn't look the same, she doesn't talk the same, and who is she, telling us that there's a problem with our elevator? Like clearly she doesn't know what she's talking about. So to then have to break down that I did have some kind of knowledge to systems and things like that, and they're like, yeah, prove it. Well, I can't prove it in this industry, but let me tell you what I know about hydraulics from my last like line of work. And you would watch their whole face like pale and be like, oh, well, maybe you do know something. So it was having to really like, not only talk the talk, but like kind of prove it, like as, like a test. But I was very blessed when I came here. I was a territory manager, which means I was did both ops and sales in my first job because I was put at a college campus. So very contained, very, like rigid, like contract where it wasn't a lot of like sales opportunity. So you didn't need like a dedicated sales person. And so I had six mechanics who really just took the time after they learned that my questions weren't questioning them, but it was questions that I just wanted to learn and understand the business and how elevators worked and the difference between, a basement drum versus, like an overhead machine and why different things, were set up different ways. And once they realized it was more from my own knowledge base, they then just made it their mission to teach me all that they could to
Did that
pass
take a
that.
little while? Did it take a little while to kind of build that trust, and they're probably looking at you going, "Who's this lady, and why
Yeah.
should we listen to her?"
Yeah, it took several cups of coffee and donuts along the journey, and but yeah, it did. It took several, months of just building that trust that, it was truly for my, benefit, because I couldn't be that liaison between them and the customer to interface and to talk to the customer about why something may truly take the added day, or
Right.
why, we needed to upgrade a certain component if I couldn't talk about the system, or explain why it was important to the value of the building. And once they realized that that's the piece, of, the middleman that I needed to be that bridge for them, so that I could be the umbrella or the protector of what they needed,
Right.
in terms of getting the job done right the first way. Um, or buying that extra time, of why we needed to shut down the sister car, and, things like that. Um, once, and like you said, it took several months. And once we broke that down, then I was in. But then when I moved to the next territory, which was more of a high rise market, it started all over
Oh,
again.
sure.
So then it was the same, process of, here I am with donuts, and, here come the series of new questions. And, but again, once the trust was built, and once they realized that it was more just so that I could be that, you know, that gap, bridge that gap between them and the customer, so that we could be the best, resource for the writing public. It really seated, that team aspect. So we were stronger and better for it. And
Yeah.
it really also cemented our role in a lot of our customer relationships too, because they knew we were very transparent and we would lay it all out on the table, and that nothing, we weren't padding, the numbers, just, for
Sure.
added time, stuff like
Right.
that.
Yeah. How long before it really, the industry clicked and you were saying, yes, I made the right decision. This is going to work for me.
I will tell you, that first year was tough. I was back to feeling like, drinking through, out of the fire hose. Like,
Sure.
man, I thought I was kind of, a pretty smart person there for a while. And, now I feel like I'm back in kindergarten. I'd come home from work at, it'd be 7:30 and I'm falling asleep on the couch. But, after the first, 8 or 9 months, I'm like, all right, like, I think I'm really going to enjoy this. Then things started to click. And then by 18 months, I felt like I've got this. I
Yeah.
knew it was
Yeah.
the right for me, but then it felt like, not only was I on the bike with the training wheels, and we had lifted the training wheels up enough that, like, you're like getting the balance, that I felt like now we could finally take them off. But that first, for anybody, and people even, who had a like strong skill set to transition over, first 18 months is rocky, because it's not only are you learning the systems, and no two elevators are the same, the needs
Sure.
of the customers are never, exactly synonymous, even with the building right next door. But you're also balancing the budget, and how do you put your labor hours in, to a formula, like in an office, and you're battling, the service line of business against the new equipment line of business, so there's so many like pieces to the puzzle that you're dealing with over the course of that, first year, that when one thing feels really easy, it means you're probably dropping the ball on something else, so it
Sure.
does take a while. We used to call it the dance, so, you know,
Right.
once you start realizing that you're not stepping on somebody's toes, is really, and you perfect the art of the dance, is when it really gets fun. And now, you know, you just feel like, okay, throw something else at me, and let's see how we do. And that's where I just felt like now it was kind of like you asked about like the transition from the aviation industry.
Right.
It felt like a flight schedule. Now
Yes.
you start the day, you've got a plan.
You get excited about it, right? It's
Yeah,
like, woo.
yeah, maybe you get to the end of the day with your plan. Maybe you make it to lunch. Maybe you don't even make it out. Maybe you don't even make it through the first cup of coffee. But how do you then adapt and overcome? How do you, then transition and shift and still, you know, do everything you needed to do, not only for yourself, but the customer, and all of that. And then how does that then shift from Monday through Friday to get to the end of the week? And, did you get all the checks, in the box? And
Sure.
I love that kind of like
Yeah.
those challenges.
Who are some of your big mentors, especially in those rocky first months? Who could you look to and say, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to get through this."
Yeah. So, I had, several, really good mentors along my journey. And I think, they're the ones that you can see. And then over time, you learn that you've got like those silent, like people that are advocating for you, behind the scenes. So, in the beginning of my career, I had, a guy named Dan Tripp, who was a regional engineer who, he just would take me out. And if it took an hour to teach me something, or if it took 8, he had the patience of an ox. Like he would just take all the time in the world, and he never was too busy to answer the phone, when I called for like a question. Um, I had this kid, Bobby Kemple, and I say kid because, he always points out that I'm older, but, we're still close to this day. But he was on the sales side. So he always taught me like, the power of the sale. Um, and so, and how that ops, sales alignment, would work. But then, in terms of like my long-term career, Dot Monahan, she was probably my biggest influencer. She started in the industry many years before me. But she started up in Maine as an admin clerk and
Wow.
just like watched what was going on in the industry and then said, I think I'd like to do that. And then went out into the field. Back at the day, Otis had a program where you could go and shadow as like a field apprentice, but for 18 months and then come back as a supervisor. So she did that
Wow.
to learn about, the program, and then worked her way all the way up to the director of field operations for the Americas until she just retired this year. And she was a big proponent, and played a huge role in my career. But she was big into also creating a safe space for a lot of our field employees and members of the IUEC, because a lot of our sisters in the field work in unions that maybe they're the only one. So
Right.
it was her goal was to help, and we started an employee resource group called Forward, where we could unite and help those women network across the country where they could find other women just to at least, like have as a resource and a friend, so that, you know, if they're in a union that maybe they never, don't have other women, that they could just, like reach out and, you know, uh, have a resource and go to
Yeah.
training seminars together and things like that. So, and also it was a way to recruit other women into the industry because they make up less than 1% of the IUEC.
Wow. Is it really that low? Less than one?
Yeah, Otis, was one of the ones that had the highest, numbers.
Hmm.
I don't know what the numbers are, presently, but yeah, it's not a lot. So, so that was a big resource for me. Brian Fry, he was amazing. He was an engineer who came into the field ops line. He never ran a P&L, but just was really good with the numbers and systems. And so he helped me a lot in terms of just product upgrades and things like that. So, but yeah, and I
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
biggest that they both taught me though was not only how they groomed and helped me, but how to turn around and give it back to
Right.
somebody else, and always making sure that, you're looking in succession planning for who's going to come behind you and making sure that you're speaking at the table for somebody else.
Right. Sorry, you spoke a little bit about, the women and the group and the networking, and what is it like, being a woman in a male dominated industry, especially like you say, to be less than 1% and to, what was, I guess, the most difficult thing about that?
For me, how I've always known it. So for me, it's, I thought it was normal. For most people, like, but that's how it started, in the military,
Sure.
so, but I also have been fortunate that I have just had a very strong support network. And, but there are days that you definitely feel like alone and isolated.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the key is finding the people who, value you, and are there to help build you up versus break you down. And I think the key that has made me who I am is also knowing that sometimes you have to work a little bit harder to be able to make sure that your voice is heard and not being afraid to speak up, and call people out when when they don't value what you're saying to the same degree as your male counterparts at the table. Um,
I mean, it sounds
when
like
I
it,
was,
it might be even extra courage, right? Courage up and above what might be normal. It's like, no, you gotta be even stronger to just stand up and say, no, I will be heard.
yeah, absolutely. And, I saw it a lot, um, both back and flying, but also, um, a lot with even our customer base here, like in the Boston area. Like my sales counterparts, for the most part, were males, and we would walk into a business meeting, and they would turn to the male, and be like, "So, can you tell me what's wrong with my elevator?" And I remember one guy's like, "No, dude, I'm just the money guy. Like, I don't even know how an elevator works. Like, you have to talk to her." And the facilities manager was like, "Wait, what?" you know, he couldn't even fathom like what was being said, So it's funny, like, even at this day and age with all the things that we've talked about, that like the whole concept of like unconscious bias still exists, that when you walk into a room, people just automatically assume that, one way or another, um, the woman's going to be at the sales side, and the male's going to be, on the operations side. So it just always, we would always get, a good laugh. And I was pregnant twice, like while at Otis, and, you'd waddle in, with your big old belly and stuff like that. And people just be like, seriously, like this is the lady like that you were talking about that's coming to fix the elevator, and you're like, yeah, that's me, so, um even pregnant, you can still do your job around here these days, so, um but like I said, I've also been in situations where I've just been very blessed with the teams that have been around me, and the people, but and it probably just helps that I do have a stronger personality that does speak up, but not everybody, in the industry's been that lucky. And I've known really smart women that haven't felt that supported, that have left,
Sure.
and that,
Yeah.
and I hate to see that, but, you know,
All the more reason then to have that mentorship and that networking group to say, hey, it's okay to raise your voice. It's okay to stand up and be heard because your opinion does matter and what you're seeing, maybe no one else is seeing it. And so, it's important to let people know.
in a lot of those groups, it's important, like people think, oh, like it's a girls' club, and it's really not. Like, most of our membership in those clubs, was typically 50% male, because it's about having allyship, and
Mm.
it's about having, men in the group too that, are willing to say, what you're doing is not right. Like, stop and listen. What she said is saying, has value at the table just as much as
Right.
what I say as well. So that allyship, you know, sometimes is as important, if not more, as just being a member.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned this in our previous conversation. I wondered if you would be willing to tell me the story about the box in Boston.
Oh yeah. So when I was a supervisor down in Boston, if you're not familiar with the city, it's a very small, like geographic footprint in terms of like major like cities. So I had 10 mechanics down there, and it was all walking routes because if you've ever tried to park there, it's just not even worth the headache. But B, just the time it takes, it's not even worth it. So um when I worked down there, I did try to get all the parts like shipped direct to the buildings that they were needed, but from time to time they would show up at our little satellite office down there. So I remember one day that like I got a board, showed up at like our little satellite office, and I called the mechanic and I was like, "Hey bud, like sorry, but your board showed up at the office. Do you want to come get it?" And he was like, "Yeah, boss, sorry, I don't have a van." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, none of us do because it's walking routes." And he's like, "Yeah, well, can't come get it." So I was like, "Okay, well, I'll bring it to you." And he's like, "Okay." So I waited till lunchtime. It was close to the summer, so it was warm for Boston. I mentioned I had been pregnant, a couple times there. And so I was about 8 months pregnant. And in Boston, there's a little park in the middle of the city. And we laugh because every day all the union mechanics from all the companies flock to the park and eat lunch together. And we call it the union meeting. And so I walk through the union meeting, but I take that board, which was small. I mean, it wasn't any bigger than probably like, a half a loaf of bread, but I
Right.
put it in a giant box, and I put that giant box on my stomach, and waddle through the park, and it looks really like heavy. And like all these mechanics start looking like, and you see them like elbowing each other, the Fuji guy elbows, the Kone guy, and you see the daisy chain down to like the Otis guys. Well, my little green shirts like jump up and they're like, "Boss, what are you doing? Like, why are you carrying that box? Like, you're gonna drop the baby like right here in the park." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, well, I'm carrying the board to your buddy because he wouldn't come pick it up because it accidentally got delivered, to the satellite office." And they're like, "Wait, what? Why wouldn't he pick it up?" I'm like, "Because he doesn't have a van." And they're like, "Well, none of us do." And I'm like, "I know." And it accidentally got, sent to my, building instead of his. And they like grabbed that box. And everybody around like heard the whole story. And by the end of the day, my little buddy like got so much flack for the fact that like,
Imagine.
that he wouldn't come pick up this, what they all thought was this massive part, which, jokes on him, it was, teeny and weighed like nothing. But my guys like grabbed that box and stormed across, to his building. And, so needless to say, he picked everything up that accidentally got delivered thereafter and still never received a van. So,
I love that. That is hilarious. I mean, to me, it shows you kind of playing their game, but in a way that you're like, okay, like you said, he came and got his parts that he needed to from there on and then on and just but being able to kind of play it in a fun way, right? To me, it's just hilarious, and then see him come to your rescue.
yeah. Yeah. The rest of them were just horrified. And like, that was early in my tenure, like in that territory. And for years after, I mean, it's still the running joke. Like, if we, you know, the industry, is not that big. And so, and I still live in the area. So if we all have beers, and bump into each other, inevitably that story comes up. And it's like legend amongst people from the other companies. Like, remember that time your boss walked across the park, like pregnant? And they all still talk about it, because none of the companies had vans. So it's like,
Right.
but you have to sometimes, push back and, just make a point when they're trying to play. So,
Awesome. I love that. Thank you. Um, so obviously you made a career change. What was it, about a year, in the last year, right?
Yeah, just about 5 months ago at the start of October, I made a shift.
What led you to kind of taking that your career in a different direction?
Yeah, I really, though I still probably bleed green if you were to like slice me open. I never thought that I would leave Otis. I love the company. But I was growing, through the company. And about 4 or 5 years ago, another one of my mentors, Jim Cummings, had made a comment that, he had passed on applying for a job because it took him a step further away from the field. And I didn't understand what he meant until I was in this last role. And I felt further and further removed from making like affecting change and like making a difference each day. I liked what I was doing, but it was more shifting towards just broader strategy, running numbers, like looking at data and big picture stuff, which all still has value, but I wasn't solving, like immediate like problems where you like, oh, I put out a fire, and like
Right.
save the world today. And um over the summer, I had mentioned, like my husband was in law enforcement, and we had, a situation with a fellow, like, law, like a fellow, one of his colleagues that, just like hit close to home. And it really put into perspective like life and like what are we trying to get out of like life and our careers and all. And it just was kind of the shakeup I needed to say I needed to go back to being, like needed and being able to make a difference in what I do every day and feeling, valued and part of the, the overall equation. And ATIS was looking, for um, somebody in their inspections department, and I just decided maybe I'll take the call. And I talked to Dave Estes, who was their chief people officer. And honestly, it was back to everything you asked me about how I felt when I first interviewed with like Otis. Um, just that whole feeling of family and value and, people staying with the company for a long time. And um, I just decided to take the leap of faith. And it was a hard decision. So you know, it's exciting and scary and, it's everything you want, but there was a whole lot of tears like in the process too. And I'm like, wait, like if this is what I want, like why am I so sad, about making, the
Sure.
change at the same time? But um in the end it was right for us as a family and me and my career and hopefully for ATIS in my journey and stuff. So I started back at the start of October and as their chief operating officer for U.S. inspections, um, and working with Chip Smith and the team over there. So
Very cool. Very cool. So looking back on these 15 years, what would you say is one of the most important or significant things that you've learned while being in the elevator industry?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that it's okay to be humble and not always to have the answers. Um, there's a lot of big decisions that need to get made on a daily basis, um, and when you think about our industry and the decisions that need to get made, it's not just about the price of, do we replace the machine? Do we switch it over to a mod? The bigger decision is, what does it mean for the riding public? But also, what does it mean for what I'm asking, my field guys to do? Because sometimes the bigger decision, comes into what is the risk value that I'm putting, my guys, you know, in harm's way, relative to the job that I'm asking, for. So, shutting down sister cars, high rise, rope jobs, overtime repairs when they've worked during the day, so there's a life safety component, not just to what, the service we provide, to the riding public, but the work that goes into, ensuring that everything we do to get that elevator to be compliant, is done correctly. And so for me, in assessing all of that humbleness of making sure that I've asked all the right questions along the way, and that I don't, when in doubt, that I, go to the resources or the code book to make sure that I've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, I think is the biggest thing that I've learned, is that it's okay to phone a friend to make sure that somebody else just like listens when you have that big decision to make, to say, hey, I just want to talk this through, to make sure that like I didn't miss something, before I go present this or go down, a certain path, because there's a lot riding on each and every one of us, before we walk away. The system may be simple, in terms of, it goes up, it goes down, but there's a lot that can happen once those doors close.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. So as we get toward the end here, last question I want to ask is, what advice would you give to somebody who's starting out brand new? Maybe they're coming off a college campus, or maybe they're coming out of the military like you. What would you say to them?
I would say pick a job in this industry. You won't regret it. And then I would say just expose yourself to as much of the industry as possible. I went through, and most of my career, well, all of my career has been on the service side. So didn't dabble in the new equipment or mod in any of my roles. But whenever I had free time or capacity, I did go out with somebody in that line of business to learn more about it, to understand how it fed onto my side. And then I would just say, make the most of it. Like, I think it's just, buildings aren't going away, the industry's not going away. And I think that there's so much that can be gained from it. And you don't, despite what you may hear, you don't have to have family members that were already in the industry to join. I didn't come from the normal like nepotism mold. And I've survived it for 15 years. They didn't cut me out of the circle. So I just think it is a great line of work. And I just think the people are amazing. And we bounce between companies. But at the end of the day, kind of like the military, it is a very small industry. And chances are you're going to run into your friends again, or maybe your enemies, but your paths are going to, cross and stuff like that. But it's neat to drive down a road, and look at a skyline and say, I was a part of that, high rise building, or I saved somebody, out of, the blind hoistway over here, or, we put in a chairlift at, this veterans home so that, somebody returning from war, like had the option, to still, get upstairs, at their house, so it's just neat to know that you make a difference, that in an industry that most people don't even think about, they just push the button and go.
Absolutely. Erin, thank you so much for your time today. It's a pleasure to to interview, and I appreciate you being with me.
Well, thank you so much. It was a joy, and hopefully, hopefully something I said resonates with somebody, and that they find as much joy in the industry as I have.
Awesome. Well, good luck to you as you continue to make a difference in the industry and in the world.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Elevator Careers podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group, a leader in elevator industry recruiting. You can check us out online at elevatorcareers.net. Please subscribe, and until next time, stay safe.